Hi, my name is Robert Chelle with Chelle Law, and my law firm assists physicians with employment contract issues. Today I'm going to talk about one thing that I almost always talk about with a physician when I'm doing a contract review, and that's the differences between claims made and occurrence-based malpractice insurance. There are three main types of insurance for physicians. One, if they're working for a big hospital network, that hospital may be self-insured. And in those scenarios, 9 times out of 10, the physician does not have to worry about purchasing tail insurance. The next one is a claims-made policy. These are used mostly by private physician practices. And then if it's a claims-made policy, the physician or the employer someone needs to purchase tail insurance if it's claims made. And then the last one is occurrence. And so in an occurrence-based policy, no tail insurance needs to be purchased. So let's break down claims made versus occurrence and start with claims made. So a claims made policy simply means a policy has to be in effect when the claim is actually made. And so how this affects a physician is they can terminate a contract, and then there could be some gap in between the last patient that they see and then the last day they can be sued by a patient. So in most states, the statute of limitations on a malpractice claim is 2 years from when the patient either knows or should have known of the malpractice incident. So if a physician leaves and then they get sued a year after they leave the employer, they need a policy in place that protects that gap, and then that's called tail insurance or extended reporting, gap insurance. But nearly everyone in the field calls it tail insurance. And so, who purchases it? How much does it cost? Let's go through that. So, the employer will almost always pay for the underlying policy. So, obviously, there's an annual premium, so that some kind of payment has to be made each year, so that the physician is insured. That's almost always paid by the employer. Now, if it's a claims-made policy, who pays for tail insurance is simply based upon the language in the employment contract. So I find most of the time, if a physician is working for a private physician-owned practice, maybe a little smaller, under 10 physicians, most of the time the employee, the physician, is going to be the one responsible for paying the tail insurance. If it's a claims-made policy from a hospital, then I would say most of the time the hospital pays for the tail if necessary. So how much is tail for a claims-made policy? A good rule of thumb is it's about twice what the annual premium is. So it can kind of vary. So the longer that the physician is with the same employer, the more expensive the tail is going to be. So I would say it starts maybe around 150% of the annual premium. It can go all the way up to 300% in some scenarios. So let's just do some math quickly. So let's say a physician is in primary care. I'd say usually the average is around $6,000 for their annual premium. So if the physician was responsible for tail and they've been with the employer for 2 or 3 years, their tail cost is going to be about twice that. So they're going to pay around $12,000 for tail. That's a one-time payment. It's not paid every year. You just pay one amount, and then it covers the physician for that gap that we spoke about. Certainly, this is something the physician can negotiate prior to signing the employment agreement. For some specialties, this can be an enormous chunk of money, OBGYNs. Some of the surgical specialties can have annual premiums 20, 30, 40,000. And so their tail costs can be, above 50 all the way up to 100,000 for an OBGYN, which is a significant amount of money for anybody. And that's certainly not an amount of money that most physicians want to pay once they leave. So who pays for that is certainly a big point of negotiation. Now, sometimes an employer is willing to split the costs based upon how long the physician has worked there. So maybe, if a physician has worked for the employer for 4 years, they're willing to either pay the entire amount or maybe it's tiered. So they stay 1 year, the employer will pay 25% and then stay 2, 50, 75, 100%. That's one way of working it if the the employer is not willing to pay the entire amount. So that's what claims-made insurance is. You do need tail insurance for that, and then depending upon the language in the contract, it will determine who pays for it. So occurrence-based insurance, you do not need tail. So an occurrence policy simply means a policy has to be in effect when the malpractice incident occurs. So in this scenario, someone's employed and there's some kind of malpractice event while they're working for the employer. There's an occurrence policy, they're good to go. Even if someone files a claim after they leave an employer, they're still covered because there was a policy in effect when the claim actually occurred. So why would you get occurrence versus claims made? Well, it's price. So an occurrence policy is generally about a third more expensive than a claims made policy per year. So if you had a $6,000 annual premium under claims made, you'd have about an $8,000 annual premium for an occurrence policy. Which one is better? Honestly, it's not usually up to the physician. They'll have to use whatever their practice is using at the time or what they're offering. If a physician does have the ability to choose one over the other, then they need to do some math, and it's going to be based upon how long they think they're going to be working for the practice. So let's just do a scenario where a physician has a $10,000 annual premium, and they're going to work for an employer for 5 years. So if claims made is a third less, so let's say they have a claims made policy, they're doing $10,000 a year, so 10,000, 10,000, all up, so 50,000 total annual premiums for the 5-year period. They leave, and then let's say their tail cost is 20,000. So then they would be, and they're responsible for tail. It would be, it's a total of 70,000, where normally the employer pays the underlying premium. So they pay the 50,000, the physician responsible for 20. Now, let's say the physician chooses an occurrence policy. So if the underlying premium is 10,000 under occurrence, it would be a third more, so around 13,333. So multiply that times 5. And so that is about $15,000 more, a little bit more than that, than if they had a claims made policy over the course. So instead of spending 20 for tail, it's 15,000 more by occurrence. So they come out ahead using occurrence in that situation. And that would be a scenario where maybe the practice says, we're willing to provide occurrence-based insurance, but you have to pay the difference between what it would have been if it was claims made versus an occurrence policy. And so in that scenario, so you just have to do the math and figure out, all right, how long do I plan on being with the employer? What's the tail cost likely going to be? How much more will I have to pay if it's an occurrence policy? Then figure out what works best for you. Normally a scenario where the physician would have the kind of the ability to choose one over the other is if they were an independent contractor. In those scenarios, they're going to be responsible for paying the tail if it's claims made, and they're going to be responsible for paying for the underlying premium. So it's up to them which policy they choose. And so in that scenario, it's kind of up to them, how to decide what works best math-wise for them. If they're joining a, private physician-owned practice, as I said before, most likely it will not be up to them. So that's kind of a breakdown of what's claims made versus occurrence-based malpractice insurance. If you have any questions, you can always contact my firm at the phone number listed below in the description, or you can always reach us through our website, ChelleLaw.com, CHELLE law.com. Anyway, appreciate you watching the video. Thanks.